Hi, my name is Ronald, and you might know by now, I'm sure, that there's a book that I wrote called Fathering Sons, just on the background here. And I want to talk a bit from that book. Hopefully today we'll talk about the impact of fatherlessness on the life of a child. I think we've kind of gotten the questions of what wrong is it if your father is not really there, or what does it change because you know what, I grew up without a dad, but hey, I turned out all right, etc., etc., that kind of line of argument. But what I want to bring across to you today is some stats, some numbers that will show you the impact of having a father in a household and how that changes ultimately the outlook that a child can have. Now, why is this important? I think if you look over time, the issue of fatherlessness has been one that's been going on and on and on through the generations. And the numbers that were there in the 80s that showed how many fathers were not in the house at the time children were growing up then, when surveys were done, and if you compare them with the numbers that we have now, you'll see that there's not much of a difference. And what we're hoping to do, at least by starting up this conversation, is hopefully in the next generation we can try to bring this down so we have more fathers staying around, I think, for some of the reasons that we'll put through today. There's a reason that a report that came out last year from Sonke Gender Justice, which I've used for most of the stats and the percentages and the numbers that you hear today. And I think once you hear that, you kind of have an understanding and your mind can at least encapsulate the whole problem that we're facing in society today. And hopefully if we manage to fix and talk about this thing, then in the future, we can have less and less of the negative numbers that you hear today. So I think let me speak about 3 items really. There's a lot of other things we can talk about in terms of trying to measure and gauge the impact of a father not being in the house on the life of a child. But today I just want to focus on 3 and we'll probably just list a few others later on and I'm done with that. And the first is in terms of a child's education. Now, why is this important? A recent survey kind of said 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. Now that's a pretty bad statistic, whatever angle you want to look at it. And probably you're saying, oh, perhaps it's just a coincidence, perhaps it's other reasons contributed. Let's look at the other thing as well. 40% of children are less likely to repeat their high school grades or primary school grades if the father is there at home to assist them with their education. Now, that's catastrophic. I'm sure from whatever angle you'd like to look at this, you can see that having a father in a house taking care of a child has a massive impact on the life and the quality of the education of that child, and even goes beyond that, but also the likelihood that they can actually spend within the school institutions until such a time that they finish their tertiary education. And I think the second thing I want to touch on as well is that is the issue of drug and alcohol abuse. And the last statistic that I want to give comes from a survey that was carried out again in 2019. It says this: 30% of children, young people, are at more risk of trying out alcohol if the father is not there at home. Now, I'm sure for some of you will probably recognize that and say, yeah, I know if I had tried to smoke or drink, my dad would have done 1, 2, 3, or 4, to make sure that I get the lesson not to do that. And that's exactly the impact right there. There's another thing as well that you want to hold on to. 75% of children in rehabilitation centers today, whether it's for drugs or addictions, whatever it is, come from single parent homes. Now, all of this, of course, kind of sounds like, but then this is just numbers in the air, pie in the sky. It doesn't really apply to me. But I can tell you that I know people personally who have their children today in such centers because they've fallen out into these drug things as a result of the father not being at home. Now, of course, like I said earlier, there's a number of lines you might draw and say, but it's just coincidental. How do we bring it down to that particular denominator as the one that's the cause? Well, listen to this. There's the third one as well. In terms of criminal activity, 85% of children that are in juvenile prison today come from fatherless homes. How do you explain that? 85%, that's literally almost 9 out of 10 of those children. The other one says this: 80% of rapists, that's of all ages now, that are currently in jail also come from fatherless homes. Now, look, I don't know if I have to throw many more stats to convince you of the importance of having a father in a house. But as you are listening to this, and as you are thinking about all of this, really we must appreciate and understand that having a father inside a child's home as the child grow up is imperative. It is not important, it is imperative, it's a must. And I know for a great number of our population, that report I mentioned earlier says I think about 6 out of 10 children are currently growing growing up without their father in the house today. And that kind of sets us again on almost a similar path in terms of the numbers that we'll be hearing in the next generation. But I'm saying today, you and I can start by actually recognizing this and hopefully going from there, knowing that we actually have to actively do something to prevent and make sure that this doesn't happen again, at least for our children that we are taking care of. So I'm saying we can talk about this, we can talk about child abuse. You know, if you really look at the stats as well and drill down, if you get my copy of my book, you'll see these numbers are listed down there. But in terms of child abuse, children that grow up without fathers in the house are actually more likely to face and suffer sexual and other type of abuses as well, and physical abuse. And this is not, like I say, a coincidence. This is stuff that is real. This is stuff that is reported. This stuff comes from survey. This is stuff that is scientific and is proven. And you know, it really goes to show just the importance of having the father in the house. We can talk about stuff like behavior of children. You know, children that generally have bad behavior in schools and in tertiary institutions and etc., you'll find that common denominator again is that daddy is not there at home. Now we really need to change. And I think there's actually an episode that really broke my heart. I was watching Utatako the other day, and that's the thing that I want to touch about now, that of identity, where a child, you know, they do the DNA test and etc., and they kind of tell you at the end of the episode, oh, this daddy A is probably your dad versus daddy B, because you know the percentages in terms of DNA test that comes out of it have proven otherwise. And it just so happens that this boy had two potential fathers on the show that day. And it turned out at the end of the episode, when they did the DNA test, that none of those men were their father. Okay, we've heard about stories like this everywhere. We go, Elokshini, everywhere else we kind of speak about. We've kind of heard stories that it's not really that amazing or that surprising. But what took my heart, what really touched my heart about that particular episode is the manner in which the boy reacted when he heard that actually none of these two men are your father. That boy broke down. It broke my heart, because the way he cried, the manner he really expressed his emotions, in that he kind of said, then who am I? Who am I? And that's the other thing that really I want to touch upon now, to say an effect of having a father in the house is that their identity is sure, their identity is secured. It just does not come from having and carrying the surname of the father, but by showing and picking up from all the lessons that we'll talk about in the later series about how a father really transfers those cultural norms from himself into his children, who also do that into their children. Zane Myers, you might know him, the guy was acting as Jack Van Onselen in Isidingo, and recently was on Scandal as well, says this: to heal a nation, we must first heal the family. Daddy, come home. And that is very important. I want to speak to you. If you probably have a child out there from a messed up relationship, or from a divorce, or from a separation, or whatever it is, the circumstance that has made you get separated to your children, reach out to your children. You might not be able to spend as much time as you did with them prior, but it's important that your children recognize that they have a father who loves them, who takes care of them, and wants to show them all the good things in life. Look, one thing I really want to press upon, and I'll touch upon it again later, is that your children don't really want your money. They're not looking after your money. They want you. They want your emotions. They want your love. They want your acceptability. They want your affirmation, etc, etc. A lot of things that we'll talk about in this series as we go forth. But I think let me leave it here for now. I really appreciate that you've taken time to watch this video, and I really hope you can just click there. There's a button right there that says subscribe on the channel. Please just subscribe, so that next time we put out a new video, you'll get a notification and you'll see exactly how this whole thing goes forth. But if you really want to get a copy of the book, let me know, send me a message, and we'll talk. Thank you very much.